All right, we are live. Welcome, everyone, to episode 6 of American Paganism and Witchcraft. I hope you're all doing very well and that the summer heat has not been getting you too terribly down. But today we are going to forget what's going outside in the environment with us, around us, at least a little bit. And we're going to be discussing pagan apologetics, what spiritual sovereignty consists of, and what the land we love and live on requires of us as both people just living here and as pagans in particular. So, why are we talking about these things? Well, to start with, apologetics really are all the rage on social media. So, we do need to understand what they are and what the purpose of apologetics is. Next, staking the claim for our spiritual sovereignty is absolutely essential for both the establishment of American paganism and witchcraft, but also its long term survival, which, to my mind, that is a very worthy goal. And finally, understanding the demands and the realities of the land we live on, that is going to shape our spiritual practices in a manner that is distinct from that of people who live elsewhere in the world. So let's jump into this. We're going to begin with apologetics. So, first of all, what are they? Now, apologetics comes from the Greek apologia, which means speaking in defense. So, this whole idea of apologetics began with Christianity in its very early days when they were trying to refute accusations against their beliefs and their practices and overall make a reasoned case for their existence in the society of their day, because that was not a foregone conclusion. So apologetics do still abound in Christian circles. It's one of their traditions. And sometimes their apologetics are directed at atheists or other non believers. And sometimes their apologetics are directed towards different sects of Christianity. Now, here's where we come in. It's irritating, but the reality is that the pagan revitalization today does have a need for apologetics. First, to clear our name from absurd anti pagan propaganda, and second, to present the intellectual case and the foundation of our beliefs, and third, to demonstrate that we really are a net good to society. Now, we know we are, other people aren't so convinced, so we have to give them a reason, essentially. And it can even be said that we need a degree of apologetics amongst ourselves so that we can have greater confidence in our own personal practices. So, this isn't something that is irrelevant to us by any means. So, now let's get into a little bit more of the weeds of this. So, what can apologetics achieve? Well, what they can do is provide declarative statements of what you believe and why you believe it. This can involve referencing historical precedents, as well as present day examples of the results of particular ideas and practices. Now, this argumentation can make your beliefs comprehensible to people outside of your faith, and that may lay the groundwork for mutual understanding and just to raise the tone of debate, which I don't know if you've noticed lately, but the tone of debate is sorrowfully low. So anything that raises that up from the gutter that's in probably going to be a good thing. So that's what apologetics can do. Now, here's the other question. What are apologetics unable to do? Well, this will come as something very difficult, particularly for people who are more rationalistic and more logical thinking, and they're just prone to being more reasonable by nature. So I realize this is going to be a tough pill to swallow, but we have to face reality as what it is. The truth is that rational arguments are only persuasive to rational people. Moreover, there's also the additional danger that if you can be talked into accepting an idea, you can also be talked out of it. Now, a rational argument is not proof of a concept in and of itself. The way an issue is framed can create a false impression. We see examples of that all the time. And if an argument is based on a false or very subjective premise, that result can lead one into irrationalities, even if this at the surface level it looks like it all makes sense. Now, human beings are just as much creatures of the heart and instinct as we are of the intellect. Therefore, it will never be sufficient to approach spirituality through our intellect alone. And also, that is why apologetics are going to have only limited value for us. They have value, but it is limited. So, let's take a look at pagan apologetics for outside of our community. Now, admittedly, it is a tedious and a trialsome business to argue the basis and validity of paganism, both ancient and modern, to non pagans, especially those who consider paganism to be synonymous with evil. Thankfully, that is not as prevalent as it was in recent days, but it seems the people who are stuck in that mindset are really committed to it. So there's a whole migraine that goes along with those kind of interactions. But nevertheless, we all live in this world together, and for the moment, it's the only one we've got. And making our case is necessary in hopes of reducing the possibility of future persecution. Now, regardless of the reception of pagan apologetics, it's necessary for us to speak about our faith, its origins, and its future as accurately and as honestly as possible. And by practicing making all of these argumentations, that can help our own thought process so that when called upon, we can actually present a comprehensible argument to people. Now, I'm going to take a break and say hello to Sita or Keitha. Let me know in the live stream chat what the proper pronunciation is. Salutations to you as well. Thank you for tuning in. So now let's turn to pagan apologetics for within our own community. Now, theological controversy is extremely common within pagan circles. We take it for granted, it's just part of our landscape. But it is to everyone's mutual benefit if we learn to debate more like grown-ups and get out of some of the bad habits that we might have holding over from previous religious affiliations. Now, there are a myriad of misunderstandings about different pagan paths, as well as disagreements about who is and who isn't part of the club. Only recently, in this past month, I've seen a lot of people trying to seriously argue that somehow witches were not part of the pagan community. Absolutely boggled my mind that anyone even attempted to make that case, but they did. So we do need to learn how to actually have these conversations and how to define what is paganism, what isn't, what does it encompass, and all of these things. And if we learn how to make our case and discuss things respectfully amongst ourselves, that also translates us into dealing with non pagans in a calmer fashion. And we have the benefit of having more stable relationships within our community that it's going to be less likely that a disagreement over some point of pagan theology is going to lead to this great big blow up and people all going their separate ways and all kinds of hostility. We don't really need that. We don't need that, but it's something for us to strive for because we're not there yet. And hello to Lady Blind Wolf. She says, I always tell people that witches for witchcraft is a practice within most pagan communities. Oh, absolutely it is. And when you think about it in the modern pagan revival, who were the first people to go public? Who were the first people outside of the broom closet talking about their beliefs and the whys and the wherefores about it? It was various forms of witchcraft. So, the people who claim that we're not a part of the pagan umbrella, they really don't have a leg to stand on. But, it's going to take time to convince some of them. And then she goes on to say there are people that are Christian, Jewish, and Muslim that practice witchcraft. That is true that there are people within those Abrahamic faiths who do practice a form of magic. How they reconcile that with the creeds of their faith, I think that's very much their own problem. I don't consider those people to be part of us. I really, truly do not. They are doing something very different. They aren't even really a part of Abrahamic religions because what they're doing is in contradiction to their own scriptures. And there's plenty of explanation for that. What they're doing is really practicing a fusion religion. They're neither one thing nor the other. Now, I'm not saying they can't be those things. I'm just saying that they it does put them outside of both our club and the Abrahamic club. So let's go on to the idea of spiritual sovereignty, since I think we've covered the whys and wherefores of apologetics pretty thoroughly. So when it comes to sovereignty, it's always a question of to whom do we answer? Now, this isn't just a question regarding what individuals or groups seek to exercise authority over us, because there's always going to be someone who decides it's their mission in life to boss everybody else around. The issue is actually who has the proper right to hold us accountable. Now, certainly we answer to our own consciences, and so we should, but by what standards are our consciences trained? Now, generally speaking, ethical standards are formed by the philosophical and or the religious ideas that we have internalized, that it's not just something we know, it's something we genuinely believe, and it's become part of our character and our mode of being. So the question then transforms into who sets the standards that we measure ourselves by. Now that's where we start getting into a bit of a sticky wicket, because that leads us to two possibilities. Either it's going to be other human beings setting standards, or it's going to be divine beings setting standards. And of course, with divine beings, we do have the issue of things getting lost in translation. But in the context of spirituality, naturally, we hope the answer lies in the divine rather than in more fallible mankind. Let's see. Lady Blindwolf has something to say. She says, there's a book called Paganism and the Law, and I'm going to order it here pretty soon. Excellent. When you do, let me know what you think of that. And just, yeah, just what your general impressions of that book are. I think I'd be interested in your review of it. So, when it comes to human authority and seeing fit to throw that off when appropriate. I mean, that actually really does go to the core of how Americanism came into being, and that's relevant for us as American paganism. Because we know when we study our history that our founding fathers they threw off more than the crown when they rebelled, had the revolution, and were ultimately successful in establishing a new nation. The feelings on a cultural level about authority and who should have it, to what extent, what the limitation are, that also plays a role in matters related to spiritual sovereignty because that is absolutely part of who we are. Now, the founding fathers dispensed with the authority of the British crown, but they also dispensed with the authority of the Anglican church that was tied to that crown. And it was the official state religion of Britain, and it still is today. Now, we know that our own constitution expressly forbids the establishment of an official state religion in this country, and that has set the tone for Americans to have the greatest spiritual freedom in known history, and why many, even in Abrahamic circles, are saying, no, what goes on in politics and what goes on in the church, they need to stay in their own lanes. It just works better that way. The idea of separation of church and state is not, written in the Constitution, but it has certainly been a cultural practice and a cultural preference for many, many years. Now, our ancestors, whether they were part of the founding generation or they arrived later and they properly assimilated, they accepted this kind of independence, this kind of you have to be acting on your own authority. You have to take responsibility for that. That's part of what the bargain of what they had to accept, not only for government, but also the independence of conscience and by extension, the independence of spirituality. Now, today, we should always claim the right to assert our spiritual judgment for ourselves and not essentially just be extensions or colonists of European paganism in various forms, as if, our own spiritual experiences have not led us to having our own impressions, our own worldview, and our own practices. We are related to them, but we are not ruled by them. And so when we think about that in the context of how America came into being and what that means for us spiritually as well, I think these are things that we should allow to simmer in our inner cauldron. And hello to Prairie Queen. Good afternoon to you too. So this brings me to my next point about how this is our civilization, and that means we are living by our rules, and that does bleed over into our spiritual practices. So again, we go back to our history with the American Revolution that resulted in the birth of a new nation and also a new civilization. And as such, our founders then reserved the right to set the tone for the nation going forward. They were not bound by the nations they had been linked to before. They were bound by what they decided. We cannot claim to value the precedent set by our ancestors if we are not taking our American lineage and this precedent into account, not the least of which is acknowledging the proper limits of authority. Now, when our ancestors came to this land and they settled, that ultimately meant that they had to relinquish claim on their ancestral homeland and fully embrace this one, becoming part of a new people and not to be just again that extension of our cousins or to be in servitude of our cousins. And just as the founders did, we can learn lessons of the past and we can make conscientious decisions about what we want to keep, what we want to adapt, and what ought to be left behind. We can see this in the way they structured our government and also in a lot of the social norms they had of their time. They didn't throw the entire baby out with the bathwater, but they made judicious decisions about what needed to change. And so too for us in our spirituality, we can also make those same judicious decisions. And it is a thoughtful process. We're not confined in how we do things here and in our own lives. Uh, you know, well, I should say that it is confined to how we do things here for our own lives. Sorry, but it isn't about imposing it on it. We're not sitting here as American pagans looking at our European equivalents and saying, "Oh, you need to start doing things our way," or looking at it the way we do. Not by any means. They have their own traditions and their right to uphold them. But we are on our own land. We are our own people, and that means we get to have our own way of doing things in the spiritual realm. And this brings up the topic of our spiritual freedom and our personal spiritual responsibility. Because most of us, at least at this time, are not born into pagan families, and we don't always have a local pagan community that's really influential enough to kind of be the default option. Each of us kind of has to find our own way. Now, in time, that is going to change, but for the moment, we're dealing with what we're dealing with. Now, thankfully, most of us did not have to come up in a complete vacuum. We all have books available to us, blogs, videos, discussion forums, and we can whack up the ginger to seek these things out. We can really find a wide variety of teachers who can expose us to many different schools of thought that can really affect how we ultimately form our own personal practice. So we've gone through this process, and of course, it never ends. But the point is that we have learned, we have analyzed, and then we reach the final bit where we start to put it all back together and create a cohesive practice for ourselves. That is our spiritual freedom. And it is a very beautiful thing. And a lot of us simply could not function without it. Now, our spiritual responsibility is for us to be courageous enough to interrogate our own ideas and to determine whether or not they hold water. This isn't about, listening to someone's argument and deciding, oh, well, I think they have a point, therefore I must be wrong or I must be right. That isn't it. That's looking for confirmation or denial. When we are interrogating our own beliefs, we are looking at the substance of those ideas and we're saying, does this make sense? Is this consistent with other things that I can see? Does this actually work in practice? What are the consequences of that? That's all asking our own selves what we think. So we can't just compare ourselves to other pagans or to prior pagan societies. We also have to take the full measure of our experiences and take into account the spiritual energies of our homeland. And America is our homeland. American paganism, it is unique and it is new. The previous tribes of peoples who were here before us, they were their own civilizations. They had their own ways, their own spiritual outlook. We're not co-opting them any more than we're trying to just copy our European cousins. We're not trying to be a continuation of that. We're not trying to copy them. Rather, we are getting down to the absolute basics and we are finding out what is our relationship with this land as an American people and as an individual. What is our relationship with this land going to be? The spirits that are present, whether they are homegrown or whether they've been brought over many centuries, what is our relationship with these spirits? And again, this is as individuals and as a civilization. So we really do have need to trust in divine guidance, and we really do have to be careful about human power plays. If we listen too much to the voice of others and we start using that as a substitute for our own thinking and our own intuition and what our own heart is telling us, it will hamper our ability to spiritually blossom. And none of us want that. A lot of us had to fight really hard and demonstrate considerable courage and personal resolve just to get to the point where we're at. Nobody's going to be interested in unnecessary stagnation or not fulfilling our spiritual potential. And it's true, we're having to do this with some opposition. That's just a fact of our existence because there are plenty of Christians and other Abrahamic religions that will nag at us, telling us that we should convert to their faith. They don't have the right to ask that of us, but never that's not going to stop them. There are some people within the tribes that and the descendants of those tribes that were here before, and there are some of them who do claim that we have no right to interact with the energies of this land at all. I think that someone needs to review to them what the consequences of conquest is. And also when it comes to that, one thing we do need to keep in mind when we look at the historical record is that the native tribes, they were not living in peace amongst themselves. They had wars all the time. They had conflict all the time. Territories, land, it changed hands all the time. So the idea that because Europeans came in and they established a new nation and they were successful in essentially taking over the continent, that somehow that's worse than what the tribes were already doing to each other, it doesn't make logical sense. It's just a tactic that's used to manipulate people. And I think we need to recognize people's attempts to manipulate us, particularly if they have a claim to sympathy on us. And then we have our European pagan cousins. Some of them will claim that we have no right to take into account the realities of this land or to deviate from anything that they seem insufficiently aligned with the traditions they adhere to. And some of them do accuse us of being inauthentic. And some of them don't even recognize us as being legitimate pagans at all. Not very nice. We get nagging from outside religions. We get nagging from people who came from prior civilizations, and we get nagging from our cousins. But neither of these groups as a whole or any of the individuals within them are the boss of us, not in any capacity. Their approval and disapproval is not really what matters. The only approval or disapproval that we should worry about is going to be that which emanates from the spirits of this land and our ancestral gods and our ancestors themselves. It's their nudges we look to. So we do need to let go of any personal insecurity that would lead us to defer to these human authorities or those who would claim human authority over our spirituality. It's just not on. So, this brings us to our third and final segment of today's broadcast, the requirements of the land. Now, when it comes to regional differences and the realities of living in different places within the country, I think it's true to acknowledge and fair that technology has leveled the playing field. But despite how technology has introduced a lot more sameness in our modes of being, each region really does require a different way of life. Take, for example, how we need to dress. Try dressing in a manner suited for Florida and the depths of a Minnesota winter and see how well that works out for you. I'm thinking that would be a pretty efficient way to start losing some fingers and toes. We have to adapt to the actual climate. And it's a fool who pretends not to, no matter, what technological gadgets that they have to keep the cold of the Minnesota winter out. You still need to adapt to what's going on in the land. And then just imagine the consequences if people were attempting to farm the exact same way in regions that had different soil quality, different weather patterns, were suited to different crops, imagine if they were all trying to do the same thing in the exact same way. I mean, the results would obviously be catastrophic. Some crops would thrive because they were in the region and the circumstances that suited them, but the others would fail. I mean, think of that. Think of the human suffering that could result from that, and all because people were not reacting properly to their environment. Then consider the tragedy that would ensue if it was normal for us to build earth contact homes in floodplains. That wouldn't lead to anything good, would it, if we just ignored the reality of that land? And these are just a few of the examples that we could think of. You can probably, listening to this, think of, 20 more about how we simply cannot react like we're all in the same region and we're all existing in the same way and that we all have the same circumstances. We know that's not true. And even just the weather and the land itself, what plant species thrive on it, what animal species thrive on it. All of these things are telling us a different story, and these stories are telling us how we need to live. And also, we need to keep in mind that the spiritual and material worlds are deeply intertwined and they impact one another. So, this recognition that the environment we live in is going to drive our spiritual adaptation and development is a pretty necessary thing for us to have in our heads. And of course, we need to honor the spirit of the place. We should try to get outdoors as locally to where we live as possible and just from time to time go out there, open up our senses, and just allow ourselves to quietly feel the ambient energy around us. Let it speak. And then trust how our intuition interprets it. If there's a special spot that is nearby to you, it just feels a little bit different, feels a little bit more important. Have enough confidence in yourself to recognize it like, yes, okay, it may not be on any map. This may not be what anyone else says, but I feel within the depths of my soul that this spot is important. And trust yourself to that you can recognize that when you encounter it. And it's okay if no one has worshiped there before, or if they have, or there's just no record of it. If the energy is there and it's potent and you feel it and you feel the need to connect with it, then it is there. And also, we're not limited to the shrines built in different places that are an ocean away from us. Nothing is stopping us from creating sacred sites here or treating certain sites as sacred. And this doesn't have to be complicated at all. All it needs to be really is a spot where we can commune and connect and be quiet and honor that spirit of the place, bring offerings to it, whatever we deem would be fitting for it. That's another area in which it's important for us to allow ourselves to trust our our intuition. And here's another point that I would really love to bring to your attention, particularly for those of you whose family histories go back in this country many hundreds of years. Because so many generations of your family have been here, the bones of your forefathers have literally become part of the land. And there are a lot of American pagans that can trace their families back hundreds of years. And that means many generations of their line have gone through that process. They have shed the mortal coil. They went to rest in this soil, and now they have become the soil. Now, in the natural course of things, we know that those remains break down, they become part of the earth. But what we sometimes don't always connect with is that because they have done so, that means that our family is now of this place. We are connected to the land because we have our ancestors here, literally uh, resting in it, to use a gentler phrase. Now, whether or not the spiritual convictions of our ancestors, of our American ancestors, bear any resemblance to ours, that really is immaterial. That's immaterial to the need to recognize that our families have become part of the land, and because they're part of the land, that means they can speak to us through its spirits. They can guide us in our efforts to connect, and rest assured that just because our American ancestors might have had a certain theological mindset while they were alive, once they died, they might have had quite the awakening. They might have been reached the other side of the veil and said, "You need to be informed of a few facts. You went a little sideways with your beliefs, but don't worry." And through that process, they may have learned, and they may not have reincarnated into their next incarnation. And as such, they may be available for us to call upon. So don't assume that their spiritual convictions have remained static since their lifetime. And another thing is that despite all the narratives that seek to deny that the land belongs to Americans and Americans belong to the land, the reality is that we do. Nature's natural processes have made that case, and the physical reality impacts that spiritual reality. The lives of our American ancestors, their hard work, their sacrifice in the defense of this land, it's just another aspect of our legitimacy as a people, as a nation, and as a form of paganism. Now, let's get personal and start thinking about how the land impacts you as an individual. When you recognize your instinctive reactions to the land's energy, that's a pretty big step. First of all, you're saying, I'm having this instinct. What I am feeling is real. I acknowledge it and I'm going to work with it. Now, we don't always, it's not always as loud as what we might wish. But so we're going to have to be kind of paying consistent attention over a period of time, particularly if we have not made that more intimate connection, but we can. And things we can do in the process of forging that connection is to make note of your mode of being through different seasons, different weathers, different places. Now, gathering up this information is probably something that will take place over a course of several years before you start really noticing patterns. But once you do, you won't be able to unsee it. And once you can't unsee it, you'll start flowing with these patterns of energy, with these tides, with this flow of things a lot more conscientiously. You'll be aware of it. And you can ask yourself, what areas, what things in general are you gravitating to? What are you avoiding? Where do you feel your full measure of spiritual power? And as you start recognizing these things, you can start determining what areas you really want to celebrate our holy days, what kind of offerings that you feel like are appropriate to make, because we're going to be relying on our instincts being informed by these energies that we are detecting. And of course, we will need to adapt as we must. Because the pathway of American paganism, this really isn't about throwing away our ancestral gods. We're not throwing away holy days, our mythos, worldview, or our history. What it is a recognition of where we are, when we are, and that we can only move forward. There's no profit in trying to just recreate what was, especially when what was something that was appropriate for a time many hundreds of years ago and was appropriate for a different continent that has a different song of its land. We should be looking at our source material and then asking ourselves, what lessons does it have for us today? How can that be applied where we are, where we live, in our cultural context, with being informed with what the land itself is saying to us through our intuition? Now, if we fail to do this, well, we will fall prey to stagnation and potential re-extinction. I hope not. I don't think so, but it's a possibility. And we should be aware of that possibility so we can work to make sure it doesn't come about. Because if we rise to the occasion, we can achieve a great deal, even in our own lifetimes. So that's pretty much what I have to say on these topics. I hope that this episode and discussion has helped you see the benefits and the limitations for being able to make the rational case for your spirituality. I hope you feel inspired to claim your spiritual sovereignty in concert with your fellow American pagans and witches. And I hope you feel more determined than ever to become even more attuned to the land upon which you live. So I've been rambling for about 30 minutes. I want to open up to you guys if you have any thoughts, anything to say, questions, ideas, any kind of experiences you'd like to share. I want to give you a couple minutes to kind of get your thoughts together, type something out if you want to speak. Hello to Brandy Young. She says, thank you. Thank you for watching. I appreciate that very much. I know this particular topic is not exactly going to have universal appeal to everyone. We are kind of a smallish club for people who are seeing themselves as American pagans and witches. So I definitely appreciate the support for sure. All right. If no one else has anything else to say, I will let you guys get on with the rest of your afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Uh, Thank you if you are watching the replay for listening all the way through. That's much appreciated. Again, if anyone has any further thoughts, absolutely share them in the comments section below, or you can reach out to me through email at brigantiablackbird@protonmail.com, or you can reach out to me on X at blackbirdpagan. So if you have any further thoughts, don't hesitate to hit me up. I'd love to chat with you. But again, thank you for being here. I will see you guys in the next episode. Bye for now.